Storytime with Stephanie Storey.
Hi.
Never start a show laughing because the audience it feels left out.
Oh, the audience feels left out. Really? Is that true?
I just made that up. I just made that up, but I've now ruined the top of your show. Sorry.
I don't care.
Okay.
I may leave that in anyway. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey. Welcome to the show. This is Story Time. And I am thrilled to have my guest here today as we met while producing a television show together. So we will be talking about producing and what that has taught us about writing. He is also a fantastic author, has 3 books, 2 novels, 1 nonfiction book called Corner Men, which is about boxing. One of his novels is also about boxing. I'm going to ask him about that obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also a playwright and writes and produces for documentaries and all kinds of things. So we're going to talk about all kinds of writing and whatever we get to. Welcome to the show, Ron Fried.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me. So I really do want to start with, so you have both a nonfiction book
Mm-hmm.
and a novel that in part is about boxing.
Right.
Why obsessed with boxing? Where did that obsession come from?
Well, my joke I always tell is, if it wasn't for Norman Mailer, I wouldn't be interested in boxing, but I've forgiven him. I liked Muhammad Ali when I was a kid. He was really wonderful. Not only was he was a great athlete, and then he had the political dimension. He was against the war. And so when I was growing up, I would watch his fights. And in those days, it really felt, when he was fighting, it really felt as though a lot was at stake politically, right?
Yeah.
One loved Ali. He was against the war. One wanted him to beat Joe Frazier in a boxing match, which is really absurd when you think about it. I was watching a video online of them fighting again, one of their old matches, and I thought, you guys should stop fighting. Your class interests are completely aligned. You should stop hitting each other on the head. But I didn't feel that way when I was 13 or 14. Anyway, so I don't watch it anymore. I wrote a piece for the Daily Beast about why I don't watch boxing anymore, because I think it finally dawned on me that the purpose is to cause neurological damage, right? Because that's what a knockout is. So, I don't know that I could feel good about myself enjoying a boxing match, enjoying a sport in which the object is to cause neurological damage. But that said, it's incredibly, George Carl Oates said, boxing isn't a metaphor for life, it is life. Because it's real, because the consequences are real. And unlike almost any other sport, it can end at any second. So that sort of makes it really exciting, right? Joe Frazier could hit Muhammad Ali and he could go down and the fight would be over like that. So it really is heart-stopping. And if watching Mike Tyson fights come along, those fights were really sort of thrilling and frightening. And I think, so I could go on forever about it. And also a lot of writers like boxing. And I think that's because probably grew up afraid of being hit on the head by people who are larger and stronger. So there's a certain catharsis about watching it happen, right? Without being in danger yourself.
But it is also, I always think of sports as really great stories, like based on really great stories, because there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and there's a winner and a loser.
Yes.
And it's like half of where I get storytelling, I'm convinced, is because I grew up playing a ton of tennis and I grew up watching a lot of sports.
Yeah.
So I always think of, did you have that? Did you learn any storytelling techniques from boxing? I don't know why I asked that. I just thought,
well it's funny. It's funny. And I wrote a piece about Mailer's boxing journalism. And I said that his boxing stuff is problematic, actually, though there are some incredibly wonderful parts to it. And I said that the thing about boxing was that it made up for a lot of weaknesses in Mailer's genius, really, which is to say he wasn't great at plot, right? But as you said, boxing has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And he wasn't great at dreaming up characters, but he was brilliant at capturing characters. And boxing has a lot of amazing characters. And the people in the boxing world, they cultivate a personality because they're marketing themselves to writers. So they become idiosyncratic, they become funny, they have stories to tell, stuff like that. So for Mailer, and also, they're funny, and he wasn't that funny, but boxers are funny. So
which one do you like better? Noveling, nonfiction, TV, play, whatever. Which form of the writing are you personally most attracted to?
I like writing fiction the best because it's freedom, right? Writing is freedom, and you have the most freedom there. You can make the sentences longer. I like to make long sentences.
You got really practical on me there, Ron. I like to make long sentences. You can do that in noveling.
Right. So I like that part of it, and you're free to do whatever you want to do.
So in television is such a collaborative medium.
Yeah.
You have worked in television for a long time.
Very long time.
I will not date you except to say, Dick Cavett.
I know that really does date me. It really does date me.
But you've worked, so I'll get to some specifics in a second, but do you appreciate or like any of the really collaborative nature of television? Like, what do you get out of that? If your preference is writing fiction and the solitary nature of that.
I get paid.
Well,
I get paid more. I think that there's a big difference, right? Because, what you learn, TV production is collaborative, right? And so you learn that sometimes if you're lower on the totem pole, you wish that the people above you would be more collaborative, would listen. And I think that, having been a showrunner a few times, what one learns is you learn to listen, because if you can create an environment in which everyone on the production is bringing their best self to the production, the show will be better. So if you want to be successful in television, you have to be collaborative. I don't think it's in a tours medium. Right. You know that, right?
No,
right.
It's not. It's you have to get in and jump in and pull in different voices.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what you've used out of that. So go back to early in your career. You're a producer on Dick Cavett, so
Yes.
You're an interview producer, and you're talking to, producing interviews with famous people, which for those people at home who haven't heard me have to go through the spiel, means you research them, you write all the questions, you help sort of create the arc of the interview for the person who's coming on the show, and you help the host do that.
Yep.
What did you learn about storytelling from that process? Because even though it's producing, I learned a lot about how to put together a story by shaping those things. What did you learn about that?
I've never thought about that.
You had to have learned, I'll yammer for a second so you can think. You had to have learned something from sitting down, and you have to pull so much research. You have to think about what's going to communicate to the at-home audience, what's going to work for the host.
It's funny because I sometimes think that it got me into a habit which might not be good, which is anecdotes, right? Get little stories that pay off, right? Because that's what really works on a TV show, right? So sort of tell us about the time this happened, or and you'd say this to someone. Get him to tell the story about meeting Laurence Olivier for the first time, or get him to tell the story about why he didn't get into Harvard and how that affected him, blah, blah, blah. So I think that sometimes actually this is true. So if you're putting together a novel or whatever, what I sometimes tend to do is I just think of all the small stories that I want to put into it, right? And then I never really make an outline, but I'll just take a piece of paper and I'll put this story, this story, this story, this story. And they're really incidents, right? They're really anecdotes. And then I just look at them and I go, okay, 1, 2, and I'll put this one in, and I'll put this one, and I'll put this one. Do you know what I mean? And you do the same thing if you're putting together an interview. I never thought of this before, right? But you're like, well, I know they can talk about boxing, and I know they can talk about television. Maybe I'll start with boxing, then I'll put television here. But then I know he has a great story about that time that he met Norman Mailer at the time, he met Saul Bellow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll put that in the middle. And then do you know what I mean? Then you put them in an order that seems that your intuition tells you will make I hate that word, but a good arc, or, you know, that just, will it work? I think the only thing I ever ask myself when I read fiction or when I write it is, or TV, it's just like, does this work or not? It's like the only thing does this work or not? Right?
You also, one of the things you do is you produce and help write docu-series dramas for television, right? So you've done like the history of the Roman Empire and what, Hugh Hefner, maybe?
I didn't write those. I didn't write those.
Right, but you're producing them. So you're helping to put the stories together and helping to get the interviews together, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've written a couple of these things, yeah.
Okay, but if you've written a couple of these things, well, first of all, tell us what that process is like. Tell us what you do on it. People at home don't know how those things are put together. And I know it sounds weird, but people care because they watch them. So when you're watching these history things on CNN or wherever you're watching them,
it's a lot of research, you know, it's just a tremendous amount of research so that you know what you're talking about. And so it's just like, you know, I never really like will read a book, but there'll be like 20 books and you just sort of look, oh, you know, this or that. Like, I worked on one about the Old West. And so, you know, you start trying to figure out what Jesse James's life was like. It was really horrible. He was a terrible person, or Billy the Kid or whatever. And it's always incredibly interesting. And what I like about it, and I think this is I can always end up, you can learn so much working on those shows, and then you end up using it later. Do you know what I mean? So that you can, if you know, like, if you happen to, I did it when I was at the History Channel, I did this project about George Washington. So I'm writing about this character and I think, oh, wow, I can use all this George Washington stuff I know, because this seems like the kind of character who know a lot about George Washington. Like, if you really know a lot about something, like I wrote a nonfiction book about boxing, and then I just had all this material left over and all these characters I met. And so you sort of can redeem, and you know, writing about boxing, I spent so many hours watching boxing matches. And I thought, oh, what a waste of time. How many hours of your life have you spent watching people beat each other up? And then, but then it sort of gets somewhat redeemed if you can put it all in a novel. Do you know what I mean? So you feel like you haven't quite wasted the time. And then I wrote this novel set in Paris, and I spent a lot of time walking around Paris, and all of a sudden I felt that sort of redeemed that. Do you know what I mean? So if you do a project where you learn a lot about the Civil War or George Washington, I mean, it in and of itself is interesting. And then you can use it. Or you probably know this about art. You have a real passion for Renaissance art, and all of a sudden you can use all of that. You know, you did it because you have a passion for it, right? You love it. You love it.
I certainly would have felt like I had wasted thousands of hours of my life on studying Michelangelo and the Italian Renaissance for no reason, except for the fact that I turned them into novels. Thank goodness now people read them. Because otherwise I would have been like, I'm just a crazy person who likes to research stuff for no reason. How do you or a show, I don't care which one, make choices about how close to the historical fact you stay?
I was going to ask you the same thing. I was going to ask, like,
and how much you stray for story, because like I think every writer has their own compass on that. I certainly have my own perspective on what I do. I try not to stray from what was possible. You know, if it's within the realm of possibility, I'll include it. But if the historical record says no, that couldn't have happened, like Leonardo da Vinci could not have flown around the skies of Florence. He didn't have the technology. That's great.
He was working on it, though, wasn't he?
Fiction actually has the bat wings working, and he's flying around, and you're like, no, that's not.
He just needed more time.
He did just need more time. So I think everybody has their own internal compass, and Hollywood sometimes, I think, skews that toward entertainment. But what's your own feeling on how to walk that line between historical fact and artistic license?
I hear my director friend saying too much headroom. I think the people I work with in television would probably say that I err too much on the side of historical accuracy. Um, I think I think a bit of a rule to go by is if it violates the historical record, don't do it. But there are certain, if you can be historically accurate, but then there are subjective things within each historical figure that can't be known. And I think within that area, you're free to imagine the psychology or what that conversation that you can't know about between two people might have been like.
I love how much you love writers. Where did that come from? When you were a kid, did you read a lot? Or you like sucked into the books to get where did it come from?
No, I didn't. Everybody says, oh, well, I grew up reading books and my parents, I didn't. When I was I read The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway, and then I just wanted to read everything, because it was such an exciting book to read. To me, I was like 14. There was something really thrilling and precise about it. It's a very strange book to reread because it's about. Have you reread The Sun Also Rises recently? It's a strange book, right? Because they just hang out in cafes. No one has a job, and they're young. Like they're like in their 20s.
I love that.
It's a great book, but if you think, and they drink so much, my God. And I always thought if you substituted marijuana for every time they take a drink, you think, oh my God, it's a novel bunch of potheads, right? Norman Mailer, he has this a wonderful collection of his thoughts on writing called the Spooky Art. And anyway, so he says this wonderful thing about The Sun Also Rises. He says that in creating Jake Barnes is the narrator of that novel. He said that Hemingway had created an ideal self, and Hemingway spent the rest of his life trying to live up to that ideal. Isn't that good?
That's true. That's probably true about Jake Barnes.
Good. He's very savvy about novels. He also said that, Mailer said that when you write a novel, you're always revealing more about your character, its strengths and your weaknesses than you know. So that's a good question to ask a novelist, right? So what does this novel reveal about your character that you hadn't intended it to reveal? Do you know what I mean? I'm sure if you look at your own stuff, you say, you don't know, because when you're writing it, there's so much that's unconscious about the act of writing a novel, right? That you're putting things in there that give, probably a somewhat coded portrait of yourself.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how much you have to basically slit yourself down the middle and dump it all into.
And you're always more revealing than you imagine you are.
More than you would ever think. And
yes.
I think that's why. So do you go back and do you reread your old work? Because I can't. Freaks me out. Can't do it.
Very occasionally. And sometimes I'm mortified. Sometimes I wouldn't put that comma there, certainly. And sometimes I think, that's pretty good.
Well, the other day, some book club lady was like quoting me to me, and I'm like, no, I can't stop reading my book to me. I can't handle it. Freaks me out. Just overwhelming.
So speaking of show business stories that work well on a talk show, Mike Tyson did that to me. Did I ever tell you this story? So I was in Las Vegas working. I was shooting an interview, and my friend, who's Mike's lawyer, called me up and said, if you wrap at 5 o'clock, we can have dinner with Mike. So I wrapped at 5 o'clock. And we went to Caesar, the Palm Steakhouse at Caesar's Palace. And on time, in walked Mike Tyson, who, is a really powerful looking guy. And he had read my nonfiction book about boxing, and he had reread it. He had reread it because he knew we were going to have dinner together, and it was pretty amazing. He said, that chapter about Manny Seaman, when he said this, the way you ended that chapter, and it was like, wow, Mike, no, I don't remember that because I wrote it in 1991. And, I don't remember what I did this morning, but it was great. It was really fun to talk to him because, he is a passionate. He knows an incredible amount about the history of boxing, and so do I. And at one point, and we were talking about these fairly esoteric boxers, and I said, Mike, we're the only two people in the world who care about this. And he sort of laughed. And, anyway.
So do you think in order to be great at a sport like Mike Tyson in boxing, or like, I don't care, anybody, do you think you have to have a passion for the sport? Do you think all athletes like that have a passion for the sport itself, or is it just the physicality of it? I mean, is it just doing it? Like, I was thinking about Michael Jordan. We were just watching that ESPN thing. And he seemed to have a passion for the sport and for the history of the sport. Do you think in order to dedicate to maybe it's not just athletes I'm asking about, people in general, do you think you have to have a passion for the thing you're working in all the time if you're great at it?
I don't know, because I think that also people turn on it, right? Because it becomes, I know that Andre Agassi had sort of somewhat bitter feelings about tennis. And I think Tyson does as well, because I think that it puts him in touch with a very aggressive side of his personality that he knows is dangerous. So I think that he probably has mixed feelings about boxing, although he seems to be planning a comeback of sorts. But I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I mean, the psychologist, someone like Mike Jordan, these people are so competitive. They're just so incredibly competitive, just to the extent that, actually, one of the first thing Tyson said to me when he sat down to dinner is he looked at me and he goes, "You're a runner, right?" And, it just sort of like took in my physical self, as if I was a potential opponent. And he sort of classified me. And I said, yeah, in fact, I am a runner. And because obviously I don't look like a contender for the light heavyweight championship of the world. But, so he had sort of very physical way of evaluating people that I thought was interesting.
So now I do have to ask, so you're working from home, you're working on a docu-TV thing. I keep pointing here because my TV's there. So you're working from home during the shelter in place COVID thing. We're in New York, for people who do not know. So how is this working from home going in television production, or how is the shelter in place distraction affecting your creativity?
Well, it's not that different from sort of locking yourself away and working on something, right? So if you're writing a book, you basically get up in the morning, you have your coffee, you go to work, and then you come down when you're finished. So it's a lot like being confined to your house. So it's not that different for me, really. I mean, I miss it like everybody else. I miss the social interaction. I miss being able to walk around without a mask, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, it's very difficult. But in terms of working, I don't find it all that different. Do you?
I've been processing so much about how this moment makes me feel about moments in history, right? About how I'm re-envisioning plagues and wars and military sieges on cities, and how it's making me re-envision things and have a new understanding of things that happened in history that maybe I didn't understand quite so well. So I've been so affected by that I know it's affecting my creativity, and that I'm readjusting everything to fit a new vision of the world. So you've just finished a historical novel, which we're not going to talk about, but whatever you're working on forward, is this going to affect what you write about moving forward?
I think so, but I think it takes time, right? So it took a few years before the 9/11 novels appeared. You know what I mean? So I think it will. The novels that treat this will come out, but I think that probably the more successful ones will take a few years before they can really process it in a way. I mean, I think there are two types of writers, right? There are writers who don't seem to be affected, who don't take history into what they write, and there are those who do, right? So there are writers who seem to exist outside of history. I always think about James Joyce, you know, Stephen Dedalus says, history is a nightmare from which I am trying to escape, right? And Joyce writes Ulysses. When he's writing Ulysses, a world war is going on. You don't really get that from reading the book, right? So it was very strange, right? You know, it didn't seem to affect his consciousness that much. It's a little bloomed his little political speech in one chapter, but it's not really a book about history. But then Proust, who's sort of writing at the same period, World War I plays a big part in his novel. So I think the different writers will be affected by it in different ways. Do you know what I mean? There are those who take in history and those who don't.
Yeah, it's such a historical moment to me that we're living.
I know, my God. But, you know, also I think, you know, when people say that, look at 9/11. I mean, people are incredibly selfish, and, you know, they say this will change. I remember 9/11 is going to be the end of irony. It wasn't. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So there's a great Balzac quote about that, but which I haven't memorized. But that essentially, you know, society forgets about things because people are incredibly self-interested. So we'll see if everybody who says this is going to change everything, it's going to change how I am. Then we'll see whether or not it does.
Story time with Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.